Hey everyone, today I'm taking a look at Awkward Guests 2, the Berwick cases. Now this is a two-player only deduction game that takes 30 to 40 minutes to play. And of course this is a sequel to the original Awkward Guests, which is my favourite deduction game of all time. And when I heard that a sequel was coming out, naturally I was very excited, and I've been fortunate enough to get an early copy here. This one is of course a Spanish language version of the game, but it is eventually coming out in English, and all the components I'm going to show you today are language independent. So this game will be launching on Kickstarter on the 1st of April 2024, so be sure to keep an eye out for that one. So let's take a look at the components here, and if you are familiar with the original Awkward Guests, this might look somewhat familiar to you, where each player's player sheet will look like this. We have this kind of blueprint of a mansion, and you are trying to solve who the murderer, in this case, of the Berwick twins are. So you have Bernice and Beatrice. Each player is going to be kind of the investigator on one of these murder cases and the mastermind of the reverse one of those. And you've got a bunch of information on your sheets here. You've got all these motives that all the different suspects have, the evidence, the potential murder weapons. Of course, again, you've got the mansion itself here, which shows the routes that they can go through to get to the crime scene. And you have all of your murder weapon types and traces they leave on the body, etc. Now you do have this player board here, which is where you're going to be dictating your actions from through this new dice system, which is completely new from the original. Each player is going to have their own player shield, which has a good breakdown of the setup and all the different actions you can take throughout the game. And unlike the original, instead of having that big deck of cards, each player is going to have their own deck of cards, which they will use to formulate their murder mystery. So again, unlike the original Awkward Guests, this one, you are setting the challenge for your opponent by deciding who the murderer is, deciding what the motive is, the weapon is, and also the path they've taken to the crime scene. And you're going to do that by using these different cards. Like for example, you can choose the rooms or the routes they've gone through, you can choose the murder weapon, and of course you are choosing the suspect itself, as well as the motives and some potential kind of red herring leads. So I'm not going to go through the entire setup procedure here, because it is just that, it is quite procedural, and you do need to be quite meticulous about it, because as you can imagine with a deduction game, the smallest of errors can break the game. So you do need to go through that procedure quite carefully to make sure you've got everything correct. But as you can imagine, you are just making sure that one of these suspects has both incentives to do the murder, as well as having the evidence, and of course being able to trace through that route to get to the crime scene. So you can see here, my opponent has set the murderer as Yoriko Yagami. She's going to start in this little coffee room here, and then she's going to trace this path through these rooms, collecting a murder weapon on the way. In this example, it would have been the number 4, which is this which number is here? This kind of big pot of scalding water here, and they're going to go all that way through to the crime scene, and it's going to be my job to solve this mystery, and it's going to be this player's job to solve this mystery that I've set for them. Now the gameplay is going to be quite simple, where when it is your turn, of course, you are going to be asking the questions of your opponent and trying to work out who the murderer is. Now, unlike the original, as I mentioned, you are not going to be going through this smart deck of cards. I think it was called the Brilliant deck system. In this one, you're going to use a dice system instead, where you're going to roll these 3 dice, and then you're going to potentially use them to take different actions. So there are a bunch of different actions you can take, and we'll go through them individually. But you do have the options to have a reroll in almost like a Yahtzee fashion, and you can even discard a die in order to flip another die to the exact face that you want. So you do have a bit of autonomy to get the exact outcome that you want, but you may have to sacrifice an action in order to do that. So let's go through all of the individual actions, the first of which is this waistcoat action, which you can use in 2 different ways. The first of which will be placing it on this spot on the outside of the board, where you will simply draw 2 cards from the deck that you are investigating and rule out 2 connection points that the murderer has not gone through. So you can see here, in this example, the connection point between the gallery and this kind of plant room has not been taken, as well as this kind of cloakroom and the diner. So that's one of the ways that you can use the waistcoat action, and of course you're going to be ticking those things off on your player sheet to rule those connection points out. The second way is to place it in a specific room where the mastermind must tell you 3 of the suspects that have not been in that room. And again, you can tick that off by ticking off the footprints in those individual rooms. The second action you can take is this interrogation action, which again can be used in 2 different ways. Now, when you use this action, you will choose 2 of the suspects from the deck here, and each one is associated to a letter, and you are going to be given information either concerning which of their starting rooms these suspects were in, which of course can be relevant in relation to which rooms they can access, as well as the option of being able to ask what their preferred weapon is. So you can see during the setup, each person has a preferred weapon type, and of course you can potentially rule them out if the track is not going to cross through any rooms with that weapon in. The third action is this testify action, where you will pick again 2 of the characters that have not been used previously in any other inquiry, and you'll see if those characters testify against each other. So you can see here that Y, Yuriko Yagami, has testified against Quentin Quills in this example. That doesn't mean it's going to be the murderer necessarily, but it is a good kind of indication that it could be the murderer. The next action is the evidence action, where the mastermind will let the investigator know if any evidence relating to any of the suspects was found in that specific room. So in this example, with the dining room, there is evidence relating to Quentin Quills, and of course you would mark that off on your sheet, because again, that is one of the pieces of the puzzle to determine who the murderer is. And the final inquiry is this forensic one like this, where you will simply draw a card off the deck that you are investigating from the forensic deck here, and it will show you a particular method of injury that was not used in the murder, or that was not found on the body. So in this example, I would tick off anything with this particular symbol on, because I know that was not the murder type used. And that is essentially how the game works. You're going to be using that information to try and deduce who the murderer is. At the end of each round, when each player has taken both of their investigations, you'll simultaneously choose from these deck of cards whether you want to continue with the investigation or whether you want to try and solve the murder. If you do try to solve the murder and you are unsuccessful, you will tick off one of these boxes here, because that's your 3 attempts essentially. But of course, if you do solve the murder successfully, then you will win the game. Okay, so let's share some thoughts on Awkward Guests 2, the Berwick cases. And I suppose fundamentally this game still has all the things that I love about the original Awkward Guests when it comes to the deduction part. You know, I love this logical puzzle, this tangible nature of having this blueprint of the mansion, where the suspects have started, which rooms they potentially accessed, which connection points have not been accessed. You can rule certain points out, you know, which weapons have been used, which haven't been used, who's got the motives, who's testifying against who. It all comes together in a really thematic package that really does elevate the kind of just the deduction genre in general. So that hallmark of the Awkward Guests and what Megacorp can do really does shine through here, as you'd expect, because to be honest, for me, they are kind of pioneering the deduction genre at the moment. Something I've noticed about this game is that you are given and provided access to information in a lot faster manner than you are with the original Awkward Guests, because you are not recycling cards between the other players like the original. This one, again, you are given quite pertinent information really quickly, especially, you know, with certain actions. You know, if you draw a couple of these forensic cards, because several of the weapons have multiple methods of injury, then you can definitely rule out a lot of information really quickly. So it definitely does give you a great forward momentum in this game, and it definitely prods you towards trying to solve that mystery sooner rather than later. So, you know, if you want your games to be a bit more punchy, because this game is definitely quicker than the original, this one only takes around 30 to 45 minutes, then that's certainly something this game provides. That being said, I do like the touches that you cannot keep on spamming the same actions, because not only are you subject to the dice rolls, of course, yes, you can get fortunate by getting the exact rolls that you want, but the chances are you're not going to do that, or if you want precise information, you might have to sacrifice a die in order to change another one to the exact face that you want. Now, I suppose some people might not like that because you are going to be subject to the luck of the roll, but because, again, that information dump is quicker, it does not bother me at all, and I actually quite enjoy that mechanism. There's also some additional touches when it comes to asking for specific inquiries, that you cannot use the same characters for more than one inquiry that round. So again, a nice way to stop you tunnel visioning and keep on spamming the same character again and again to get all the information about that character. And I suppose the unique thing about this game, and one of the unique selling points about this game, is the fact that you challenge your opponent by making that scenario yourself. I can't think of many other deduction games, if any, that do that, which I think is a really cool touch, especially if you are going to consistently play this game with the same player. There are quite a few little tricky things that you can do by, offering, false leads. Are you going to spread the information really thin amongst all the different suspects? Are you going to compile them amongst a couple of suspects? So there are some really kind of intricate false leads there. And the more you get familiar with this setup system, the more you can play around with those man-made scenarios. So it's quite nice that you have some autonomy and ownership over the scenario itself, rather than playing from a generic deck. So you can really kind of personally challenge your opponent and make them fall for those misleads. Now, that being said, the setup process is quite arduous, as it is with the original Awkward Guests. It is going to take 15-20 minutes maybe to start with to get that setup correct, but the more you play it does become simpler, and the process is actually pretty logical once you get your head around it. But that first time or two you play the game, it might be a little bit jarring, because you are going to be so precise in not getting anything wrong. Some cards have to stay in the deck, some cards have to come out of the deck. You need to make sure a certain amount of misleads are there. You want to make sure that certain routes are taken, etc., to make sure that all the information is spot on. Otherwise, the game will simply crumble. So be prepared that if you didn't like the original Awkward Guest because of the longer setup time, this one is probably not going to be any quicker, at least for the first few games. Another thing that I've noticed with this game is that because it is a head-to-head style game where when it is not your turn, you are still having to participate as the mastermind and provide truthful answers to your opponent. And what that means is that when it's not your turn, you don't really have that downtime to bury your head in the sand and look at your sheet to try and work out what the mystery is. So sometimes when the game draws to a halt, you both have to halt and try and map things out, rather than taking the time on your opponent's time to try and map your puzzle out again, because you have to be engaged at all times. So something to bear in mind there. Something else I found with the game is that because this game uses a dice system rather than the cards, you do miss out on one of the kind of redeeming features of the original, which is when you are given information in the form of a card, the card would tell you exactly what to cross off on your player sheet. And this one, because of course it's all kind of language independent and there's no clear symbology on what happens when, sometimes it's easy to forget or get confused about what each symbol means. Again, this is going to get ironed out with repeated plays, but sometimes you're going to have to keep on cross-referencing with what each action actually does. Now, the shields here are very useful. They do give you what you need to know, but it's not going to be as smooth maybe as the original. Again, at least not in the first couple of plays. There are a couple of additional foibles that I've noticed, which are probably more on me than being a fault of the game, which is because you are constantly flipping between your side of the sheet and your opponent's side. Sometimes I did write the results on the wrong side of the sheet, and of course that can create a whole cascade of wrong actions that you need to backtrack on and cover up your mistakes. And I also found that sometimes I was drawing cards off the wrong deck. Again, more on me, probably me being more of an idiot than the game itself. But these are little things that you need to be on the ball with, otherwise the game can fall apart. So just be cautious of those. let's briefly touch on the production. I'm not sure if this is going to be the final version of the game here or a pretty advanced prototype, but if it is the final version, I'm perfectly happy with it. All the quality of the components is really good. The dice are nice, obviously purposely made for this game itself. The sheets, I think, are well laid out, nice and clear. The cards are of good quality, and it's not like you're going to be shuffling them a whole lot anyway. And it's got that classic awkward guests look with that kind of grotesque, cartoony art that I personally really like. I know it's not for everybody, but I think it's got a unique look and it stands out from amongst the pack. Okay, so let's share some final thoughts on Awkward Guests 2. The Berwick cases. And as you'd expect, Megacorp know what they're doing with deduction games. You're going to get that satisfying deduction puzzle of trying to solve a really enjoyable and engaging murder mystery. I do like this idea that you can set challenges to your opponent by purposely making a bespoke scenario for your opponent to solve, which makes it that much more engaging and more fun when at the end of the game, you're explaining through your thought process and the red herrings that they took, etc. That's a really fun process. Now, as I said, be aware that the setup time and the procedural nature of it can be a little bit laborious at times, but that is, I suppose, somewhat nullified by the fact that you are given information a lot quicker here in a lot quicker succession, and you can very quickly start ticking things off on your player sheet. And if you're good at deduction and you use this dice mechanism to your advantage, you can probably do a pretty good job of burning through this information very quickly and heading to a successful murder mystery being solved. So that race nature, that head-to-head nature is really going to shine through if you and your opponent both invest in this game and are of a equal skill level. So again, if you are going to regularly play or consistently play a two-player deduction game with the same person, then definitely give this one a look. If you like the original Awkward Guests, but you generally cater to higher player counts, then I'd probably say to keep with your original one. You probably don't need both of them. But again, if you are regularly and more often than not playing two-player only, this is a good one because of that nature of being able to set the challenge to your opponent, being a little bit quicker. And again, unlike the original, where the two-player game you'd be recycling cards back and forth, this one isn't going to have that because of this Yahtzee dice system. So again, this one is launching on Kickstarter on April the 1st, 2024. So keep an eye out for it.